This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne and Jeremy Fisher.
This is A Voice!
Hello and welcome to podcast 13, and he's back. We had so many questions about the SOVT, and we should say that Oren Boder, who's our guest today, Gillyanne and I did a course last Saturday, which was the SOVT Workshop, which was actually amazing.
Yes.
And we have had a barrel load of questions, which we decided to make this podcast the SOVT AMA Part 2.
So thank you, first of all, Oren, you were our first podcast guest, and
Yes.
you're also another first is that you've been our first pop-up workshop guest as well.
Yeah. So welcome to the podcast, and we're going to go straight in. We have oh no, you've got a thing.
I haven't given him a chance to speak yet, but wait,
That's all right.
can I just give you some feedback, which is about the course. Thank you so much for arranging that. So many things to go away and work on. Despite the rain, I bounced back into the house and gushed a load of things at the husband. He now looks shell-shocked and doesn't really understand anything I've just said.
And we'd like to give a
I think that's good feedback.
We'd like to give a personal apology to Grace's husband. Great. Hello. How are you?
Yeah, hello. Good, actually. I'm still kind of buzzing from the other day. It was really fun.
Yeah.
And I think the types of questions and the types of ideas that everybody was having is going to be so cool and interesting to discuss today.
Yes.
I think, you know what, I've been thinking about it obviously since Saturday, and although there is scientific research and also quite a lot of theoretical research into how SOVT works, we're really only at the beginning of what it means to put it into practice in different situations.
The application.
In singing, teaching and voice use. We know something about therapeutic voice work, but we don't know a lot about purposing it in singing teaching. So I feel in a way that the course that you've created and what you're doing is really contributing to that, and
Yes.
that we need an army of people out there now to sort of go out, try things out and start collating that info, which for me as a researcher is hugely exciting.
Yay.
Okay.
We have people have been submitting questions in all sorts of ways. We had questions on email, we've had them on Facebook, and we've had some of our speakpipe.com/vocal process. People have been using that, which means we actually get to hear their voices, and we got 4 or 5 of those. So I want to go straight to...
Should we ask Oren first to do a very quick definition of what SOVT is? What do we mean by that?
Okay, you've got 30 seconds, go.
Okay, SOVT, so semi-occluded vocal tract, basically means that there is some kind of partial occlusion, partial closure at any point along the vocal tract above the vocal folds. That partial closure creates really cool little physics tricks and interactions that sends air pressure and acoustic energy backwards to re-interact with the vocal folds. Basically, we're just recycling all of the energies that we've outputted so we can reuse that for our benefit when doing other singing tasks.
It's like regenerative braking.
Great. It is regenerative braking. We've got ourselves an
We've
electric...
just got a new EV.
We've got a new EV, and I am loving the regenerative braking.
Makes so much sense.
Yes.
So much sense.
Love that.
There you are. There's a new... Is it that one's an analogy for you in addition to your soft close cupboards?
Yes.
Yeah.
Having that one.
We'll come to the soft close cupboards in a minute.
We will indeed.
So technically, pretty much anything above the vocal folds can be an SOVT device. So it could be the back of the tongue, it could be the lips, it could be the soft palate, it could be anything. And where we're looking at now is the difference between active and passive SOVT. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, so it's probably easier to explain the passive stuff first. So passive is just by using some kind of device or tube or straw that is independent from the body, that you place at the level of the lips. And so you haven't really got to do anything physical except for just gently sealing the lips around whatever it is that you're using.
Yep.
Active then is kind of all of those things that you just kind of explored there. It's the other stuff that you can physically manually manipulate about your anatomy and articulators and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think one of the neat things you said in the workshop was that in fact it's easier for us to control the passive form, the sort of the variables there, because we don't always get, enough biomechanical feedback about what we're doing internally.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also more reliable to use something like passive, because you can always come back to and use the same length or diameter or whatever of straw. Whereas when you try and reposition the things that you do actively, you might have a slightly different tongue position or a slightly different mouth shape. So it's harder to be more reliable with the effects that you want to receive.
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
cool.
Absolutely.
All right, well, I've been using straws empirically for, about 3 or 4 years. And I'm sure lots of other singing teachers have been doing so as well. And I hope that these questions that are coming up are going to help with understanding and giving people ideas.
So I'm going to start with Monia. Monia de Swart said, my biggest question is how to get my students from straw work to actual singing. Even with the humming and singing the melody with the straw, it still seems such a big gap when articulation comes in. And in fact, she was not the only person
we
to
had
ask
something
that.
similar from Franca on Speak Pipe.
In fact, let me play Franca's because it's very similar.
My first question would be how to go from straw phonation, either in water or not, to actual singing, and what happens with the effort, because when you go back to normal singing, there is more effort needed.
Now, we might have to unpack that from
Yes.
Franca, but what's interesting is the basic question is how do you go from straw phonation to singing? Well, let's start with how do you go from straw phonation to singing vowels?
Okay, so do you want to start, Oren? Because we've got thoughts as well, obviously.
Yeah, so I think what I would do is work with straws and then begin to interchange between straw work, vowel work, straw work, vowel work, straw work, vowel work. And so you kind of put the normal stuff in the middle of of the straws. And so you kind of create that environment, then you do the work without the straw, with that environment still persistent, and you bring the straw in. I would initially start with that, I think. I think there's a lot of other things to bring into it. I have a feeling, Jeremy, you might have some differences there, but yeah, it'd be interesting.
No, not at all. No, I think what you're talking about is comparison. And I think comparison is absolutely vital.
Yeah.
We do a lot of exercises where we go from speaking setup to singing setup and singing setup to speaking setup because you're doing comparison all the time. And I'm thinking when you're doing, I want to break this down really finely. Let's say that you have a particular phrase that you want to sing in a song. And we're taking the straw phonation now away from warm-ups and we're putting them into actual practice.
Yeah.
So the first thing that you do is you have done a warm-up with the straw, or you've been working with the straw just over your range generally to get the balance that you want, just in a sort of general balance terms. Then you sing So you hesitate to use the word hum.
Yes.
You had this conversation. I hesitate to use the word hum because hum normally means a nasal consonant.
You vocalise into the straw.
Thank you. So just to break that down, sometimes if you hum, you almost certainly hum on a nasal consonant, which means the door into the nose is open, and you don't want that when you're doing straw work because it will bifurcate the airflow, and you don't want that. You want all the air coming down the straw. Okay, so you phonate down the straw at pitch. You sing down the straw.
In your target phrase.
In the target phrase. And what you're listening for, feeling, is a balance in that particular phrase. You then take the straw out and reproduce the feeling, the balance, the volume without the straw. And then you go put the straw back in and do the same thing, take it out and do the same thing. Now we're on vowels at the moment. It can be a single vowel on a phrase like that so that you have a really direct comparison. That's how I go about with vowels, and we'll talk about consonants in a minute.
Yes, and I think as a teacher as well, in between, if I was introducing the technique to a student, I would be saying, does it feel different as you move from singing the song in your normal way to singing through the straw, to singing with the straw and then into vowels? What feels different? So to get the student to articulate that difference in their own words, so they can start to reproduce that. It is a kind of reprogramming, and I think the contrast and compare phase, which frankly is something we do all the time in our teaching anyway, as Jeremy said, I think that's the empirical bit that the teacher has got to be prepared to do. Yes. And to notice, you know, if the student says, actually that feels harder, or it feels tight down here, that might be a time when you actually change the width of the straw, but I'm sure we'll come up to that later.
I think following from that as well, Jeremy, I know we had a conversation the other day about potentially creating the shapings of the vowel sounds whilst keeping the straw in place. Obviously, you're kind of mitigating the effects of how the mouth is going to articulate things, but I think you can get a very good representation, and potentially that is another good way to go, is to really just try and train those shapings whilst having the efficiency of the straw. I would maybe even consider that as a precursor to the comparison phase, just as like an extra layer.
Yeah, I like that.
Do you know, I haven't tried that myself, so that's going to be in my next session.
There's something I want to pick up, because what we're suggesting is that you do it from the straw to the singing and not from your standard singing to the straw. Because there's a question that's coming up, and it's actually Franca's third question, she submitted 3, where we talk about that a little bit more. But I think what's interesting is, for me, you get the balance down the straw first, and then you match the singing without the straw to the balance.
Yes, I think that's really important.
So you are forming the vowels internally if you're bringing the vowels in, and by and large vowels are made with different shapes of the tongue, so that's fine. There's maybe a little bit of or ooishness because of the lip position, but yeah, I think that's a very good interim step.
By the way, I was practicing yesterday, and I didn't realise that's what I was practicing, but I ended up doing improving my harmonics singing, my overtone singing, which is, I actually started to get really clear overtones by doing different vowel shapes down the straw.
Oh, interesting. That's cool. What kind of straw were you using?
I am on, at that point, I think I was on a 7-inch. I thought a 7-inch. Hello.
This is
have a very large
7
mouth.
millimetre.
7mm straw. I normally stick with the 10mm because I like it the most, but actually the 10 didn't work as well, so I think I was on a 7.
I'm loving the 7 at the moment. So, just a quick interim question from me, really. I was thinking about the acoustic effects of working with a straw. We don't get that benefit when we're working with a straw in water, though, do we? Because although water does transmit sound, we're not getting that lovely toing and froing of the acoustic sound wave within the tube. I'm right on that, aren't I?
Yeah, the thing about the water is it kind of acts as like a little bit of like a muffler. Yeah. The second you direct that acoustic energy down into the water, you kind of just dilute it and dissipate it, and so you don't get a lot of the resonant boosts as a result of just using the tube external from the water. But also with that, just over the last couple of days, I was really thinking about material properties. Typically, the kind of things you do with water are with potentially like a silicone tube that's maybe a bit wider, and the silicone itself isn't going to allow for those sounds and that acoustic energy to bounce around within. It's going to kind of absorb it, whereas something like a stainless steel or a plastic that's a bit more reflective will allow for those boosts. So material properties, I think, play quite a big difference when you're talking about acoustic.
I'm glad you've raised that. And just for those who are watching on YouTube, I waved a Dr. Vox at everybody at that point, which is a silicone tube. And of course, this one is Oren's lovely high-grade steel. Is that right?
It is.
I'm wondering if we could go to Pippa's question next, because she had a very interesting question.
Yes. So Pippa says, when I'm singing through the obiwan straw, which is the straw that Gillyanne's holding at the moment, I sometimes hear a stream of air as well as my voice through the straw. I don't normally hear this air using straws made of other material. I can eliminate this air noise if I don't blow as hard. Could it be the material, or am I just blowing too hard?
Okay. Yes, there's a few things happening here.
Yes.
Talking about the physics very quickly of what's happening with our straw compared to others, a normal straw, you just have a unrestricted fixed length that air can flow through.
Yeah.
With ours, we have a range of contracted sections and expansions, and we know that as air moves to an area that is smaller, so if it moves from a high area to a low area, the speed of that air is going to increase. And so you kind of have slow, then fast, then slow, then fast, then slow, then fast. And those rapid changes, I mean, in essence, create almost like a whistle-like effect. So that's one of the components. It might be that it's just a phenomena of the way the air is just moving through the tube. On top of that, then, if you have slightly high pressure to begin with, the overall airspeed is going to be increasing. When it comes to those contracted sections, the air is going to be moving faster, which creates more of that whistle. I mean, it's basically the same way as you whistling with the lips.
It's really interesting because I started experimenting.
I did the same.
Yeah,
So
with having said that, and I'm actually going to do a little experiment
you
on
share
microphone.
yours, I'll share mine. Okay.
And I want to do it with your straw and a standard plastic one, which I think
That
is
looks
a
like a
7.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'll do it with I'll do it with yours first. Hang on, I have to take the end off. It's a little
super
too
narrow
strong for me.
Yes.
So what was interesting is that I started with the air sound and then brought voice in to see what I could do. So this is interesting. The air sound carries on the whole time.
Yeah.
And I wondered whether I was actually doing a slightly breathy sound, so that the closure at vocal fold level was a little loose. So I thought, what would happen if I closed a little stronger? And the answer is the sound goes down. So the breathy sound diminishes. Could I then get a completely unbreathy sound? I mean, basically, can we lose the sound of the breath turbulence at all? And I thought, got to try this.
Okay.
Now, what I started to play around with was my tongue position. And I discovered that if I've got a deeper tongue position, I get more air turbulence, and if I've got a high-fronted tongue, I get less air turbulence. I don't know what that means, but it works every time.
Okay. I'm going to pitch in. I know that Pippa's a classical singer, so I did a bit of, sort of lyrical singing down the wide straw, well, the sort of round this end here. I can hear air. Now, if I do, which is my non-lyrical voice, I don't hear any air.
That's your M1.
The other thing I found was that when I used, this is a biodegradable straw, this is my lyrical, I didn't get so much hiss, I thought. And for me, I think it's to do with the position of the lips, that this is a bit heavier. And what I found was that I wasn't actually puckering in the same way. So that might be a factor to look at.
That's so interesting. I think that there's a couple of other things also going on here that potentially compound all of that. With ours, because of the way the sections are connected together, essentially we have a connector piece here and a connector piece here. If, depending on the flow, there is a chance that air can leak through these sections, which might create that sound. I think it's minimal. If you're like super high pressure, then you're probably going to get a little bit more leakage. But I think the other probably more interesting thing that might be happening is I wonder if the material itself is boosting the sound of the airstream in addition to the other harmonics at play.
Possibly.
This is what I was wondering, if you were getting a kind of an acoustic artifact from the material, and that you shouldn't really worry about it, I don't think. But I was so interested when I saw Pippa's question.
Yeah.
I know her singing, and I thought, well, this is not a singer who sings with a lot of air. She's got great control. And I found when I sang in my classical voice, I had exactly the same effect with the metal straw. So something to notice.
We've been talking about...
it's just a geeky thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've been talking about the obiwan straw, and for those of you who aren't watching on YouTube but are listening to the podcast, I just want to describe it. I want you to imagine a little telescope, because the telescope expands and contracts. You pull it out to see further, and you push it in to not to see as far, or when it's at rest. And this one has got 3 sections, which are get slightly bigger as they go down to the end. Well, I say the end, but you can blow down both ends of it.
Can you hold
Not
it
at the
up?
same time, but I can. This is
YouTubers.
the YouTube. This is obiwan straw, and in fact, this one has a little piece that goes on the end, which also gives you more possibilities.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the obiwan straw is because it is wider at one end than it is at the other. If you blow down from the narrower to the wider end, you get less back pressure.
Yeah.
And if
got
you
that
blow,
right, haven't we? Yes.
And if you blow from the wider end down to the narrower end, you get more back
Well,
pressure.
the back pressure will increase as it goes along,
It's
and then
specifically because the tube gets narrower.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And in fact, obviously, because it's expandable, you can pull it out to its full length, which will also increase the resistance. And you can reduce it to, in fact, its shortest length, which will make the resistance slightly lower.
Now,
So in fact, you have a lot of different variations.
are we going to attempt to define back pressure?
Let's
Shall we go there?
talk about back
Yeah.
pressure. In fact, hang on, somebody sent a question.
We've got some great questions about that.
We did. It was...
Oh, was it Lorraine?
No, it was Monia.
Yeah.
Right, Monia again. She said, oh, and another one. I have trouble formulating this question, so I hope you get what I mean. Maybe I'm completely on the wrong path here. I'm sort of struggling with this whole subglottal pressure, airflow, back pressure thing. Some students find it really hard to feel the difference between airflow and air pressure / subglottal pressure. They just record a sensation in their abdominal muscles and can't really tune into the feeling of the larynx. What do you think would be good SOVT exercises to differentiate between them? Is it just using different straw widths and lengths? Because obviously breathing through a wider straw means less back pressure, so I'm sure it would also have an effect on the airflow and the subglottal pressure.
Okay.
Really great question.
Okay. There's a lot there.
There's a lot. There is a lot there to unpack.
Yeah, she's a very experienced teacher and singer.
Yes.
I don't have the question in front of me. Can you give me the bullet point rundown again?
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot to unpack.
What's the difference between airflow, air pressure, subglottal pressure, and how would the students feel it?
Okay. So when we're talking about, let's just quickly clarify flow for a second. So flow is basically just the movement of air, and it can be at varying speeds.
Yes.
Typically, and I say typically, the pressure and flow are, they kind of track each other. If you increase the pressure, it is likely that you will also increase the flow. I'm saying likely because it's not an exclusive. You can have a lower pressure but a greater flow. So we're kind of going, on the typical here. So then, the pressure is the... How do I easily explain pressure?
I can come in at some point because I've got some ideas.
I have some exercises that people can feel it.
Because I am going to come in here because
Okay, sure.
I want to separate things out.
Okay, yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, flow is mainly controlled by the lungs, which is the amount and speed of air that comes up to the vocal folds. Pressure is a combination of that flow and how much the vocal folds resist it.
And when people talk about subglottal pressure, it's actually the measure of the pressure
Just underneath the
just
vocal
below
folds.
the vocal folds, which can only be measured directly by having a tube put in through the trachea, which has been done in research.
Ew.
But it can also be measured at the lips with, typically in the Swedish research, they use the sound pa, pa. So they measure the changes between the unvoiced amount of air used for the unvoiced and then moving into voice. And all of that is noted in a massive collection of research.
Can we break this down even more?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't think, in the explanation you just gave about pressure, I don't think it's exclusive to flow. You can increase the pressure without having any movement of air, which is interesting.
Really?
Because then,
How do you do that?
so I'm thinking about Pascal here,
Yeah.
in that if you have a change in pressure at one point of the system, it is equal at all points of the system without necessarily there being a need for any flow of air. So you can close off
Oh, yeah.
a
Okay.
system,
Yes.
pressurize it, but no air is moving. You're just reducing the volumetric space, but you're not allowing the air to flow outward.
You're definitely not allowing the air to flow outwards. That's really interesting because you said reduce the volumetric space, and my translation before you said that was, yes, you're closing, let's say, the vocal folds or the lips, whichever, and then you're building pressure up underneath. But in order to build up pressure underneath, you have to actually make the air move. Now, what you're saying is that the air doesn't move, but you're reducing the volumetric space to increase the pressure of air inside, for instance, the lungs or the throat. Oh, we're onto full science again, aren't we?
Oh, you can do it.
Yes.
You can do it.
See, this is the interesting thing, because if you just close your lips and you don't do that, the air doesn't move and nothing happens. You've just got nothing. You've got a closed canister, if you like.
Can I show you something? This is not recommended, listeners. Take a breath in and close your glottis.
Yes. Hold your breath. Yeah.
So now we have the same lung volume and the glottis is closed.
Yeah.
And now push up with the abdominal content. So you're pushing the diaphragm. So you're making the chamber smaller and thereby increasing the pressure.
Absolutely.
So then,
Is that what you meant?
yeah. So are we then saying flow is the movement of a volume of air from one place to another, whereas we're talking about essentially now a closed system where the volume of air is the same, but we are essentially compressing it to pressurize it.
Yes.
Although air is incompressible, so there's an issue there. But the idea is the same. We're compressing the chamber.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are actually talking about exactly the same thing. It's just I'm looking at the air and what it does, and you
Sure.
guys are looking at the canister and what it does.
Sure, yes.
But it is exactly the same thing.
Well, what
Yeah.
I went with was Oren's idea that when we've closed the system,
Yeah.
now obviously when we're vocalizing, the system is always open in some way, which is where I think Ohm's law comes into play. But
The reason that as a singer, the reason that I'm interested in this is because you can set your vocal folds vibrating, and then you can make your air travel faster. That's flow. And in a way, that's not to do with resistance. It's not to do with subglottal pressure. The subglottal pressure is a result of it rather than an action. And actually, if you keep the subglottal pressure the same and you increase the flow speed, you start to blow your vocal folds apart, and you are more likely to get a breathy sound.
Yes, but then you'll also decrease the pressure at the lung level as a result,
Yes.
quite more rapidly.
More rapidly.
Yes.
Yes. We are talking the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. No, yeah. It's one of those terminology things, isn't it?
Different sides.
It is.
Can
It
I
is.
move into practical, because we're all having
Sure.
a time.
Yeah.
First of all, I think one of my responses to you, Munya, would be, well, yes, it is hard to feel subglottal pressure
Yeah.
because we're not really meant to be feeling things at vocal fold level. We're not. Our neural system isn't set up to do that. Although we can build in proprioceptive feedback. So a typical way I would do it, to not stress the system too much, would be to get people to close their lips and puff up their cheeks.
Yep. If you close your lips and allow your cheeks to puff up, as Gillyanne is demonstrating beautifully now,
Like a blowfish.
yeah, what happens?
You feel pressure behind your lips.
Great.
So you feel that sense of back pressure. If you then start to make a little hole in your lips, I hope I'm not going to make a fart noise, but we'll see.
The vocal process.
Vocal farts, these are.
Yeah.
Now, I'm obviously not vocalising yet, but I think this is where the puffy cheeks exercises come from, that you'll read about in Janice Chapman's book, where you're doing and you can do degrees of puffiness. So if I wanted more flow from my students, I would get them to puff up their cheeks quite a lot. If I wanted less flow for someone who was maybe more of a CCM singer, I just say pouty lips. And I find that balances the pressure and flow better. So Monia, maybe you would try that first, because students can feel that. And then you can, what you've done then is you've raised a bit of awareness from them. And then when you start to use the straws, you can ask them to say, well, do you feel that's giving you more backflow, more back pressure, or less back pressure? And just use the words that seem to make sense to your student.
And I want to go to another bit that she said in the question, which is her students just record a sensation in their abdominal muscles, and they don't tend to focus on the larynx. And the abdominal muscle thing is a byproduct. If you have, in fact, you can all do it.
But it's a much stronger sensation. That's the problem.
Yeah, if you close your lips completely, so you're closing everything, and then you try and push air out, what's happening is that you are working against a lot of resistance, as in there is no exit, and your abdominal muscles then kick in to try and work harder to push something out, and they are big muscles, so that you're much more likely to feel those than you are the much smaller ones. Okay.
Good. Right, well, that was fun, wasn't it?
That was a long answer.
Very good. Thank you for that, Monia, because I think a lot of singing teachers will relate to that question.
This has been so amazing and so intense. We actually think we're going to have to split this into two. So I'm going to just say thank you to Oren just for this one. There will be another episode out with the rest of what we're talking about coming out soon.
To be continued.
To be continued. This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne Kays and Jeremy Fisher.